The Confederacy had brave officers. What it could not build fast enough was a machine. By late May of 1863, Arthur Fremantle had left the river crisis behind and entered a different part of the Confederate world. Vicksburg was still tightening. Grant was still pressing. Johnston was still trying to gather force after the decisive movement had already happened. But Fremantle's road now carried him into the officer class itself. Mobile's harbormen, railroad officers, bishop generals, cavalry commanders, foreign soldiers of fortune, and Bragg's tense Army of Tennessee. What he found was not a cartoon of incompetence. That would be too easy, and it would be false. He found courage, discipline, serious men, religious ritual, long lines of cavalry, soldiers willing to fight in bad clothes and worse conditions, officers who knew the ground and understood the danger. He also found the deeper wound, a command system too personal, too slow, too improvised, and too dependent on individual character to match the industrial machinery now closing around it. The episode begins at Mobile on May 25th. Fremantle sees a port trying to survive by ingenuity. Mobile Bay is long, shallow, and difficult. The entrance is defended by Forts Morgan and Gaines. The channel is tortuous, obstructed by pine piles and laced with what Fremantle calls ingenious torpedoes. This is Confederate defense in miniature. Local knowledge, fixed works, improvisation and danger built into the water itself. He also sees blockade runners. He sees floating batteries. He sees refugees from New Orleans arriving by the day, adding to what he calls a universal feeling of exasperation. One woman tells him she would give up everything to see the southern city redeemed from enemy occupation. Mobile is not calm. It is a port under pressure, pretending it can still control the terms of the war. From Mobile, he moves by rail through Montgomery, West Point, Atlanta, and Chattanooga. The railroad becomes the nervous system of the Confederacy, and it already looks strained. At West Point, he sees wounded soldiers from the Mississippi campaign. At Atlanta, he meets 3 trains crammed with soldiers for Johnston's army, cheering and yelling like demons. Everywhere, men are moving toward crisis. The machine exists. It is just too thin. Railroads carry wounded men, rumors, politicians, reinforcements, and refugees on the same fragile lines. They connect the Confederacy, but they also reveal its limits. Every delay has strategic meaning. Every broken line becomes a political problem, a logistical problem, and eventually a battlefield problem. A country can have brave men and still lose the race of movement. Fremantle sees Confederate soldiers rushing toward danger, but the deeper question is whether the system can concentrate them before the enemy has already chosen the terms. Then Fremantle reaches Wartrace and the circle around Braxton Bragg. Hardee impresses him first. Soldier-like, professional. The author of the drill book still used by both armies. Leonidas Polk is there too, the bishop general, a reminder that this army is not merely military. It is social, religious, and political all at once. Fremantle also meets Bishop Elliot, Confederate officers, and political figures whose presence around the army makes camp feel like government by conversation. On May 29th, Fremantle meets Bragg. Bragg's reputation reaches him before the man does. Fremantle notes that Bragg is known as a rigid disciplinarian, a commander willing to shoot freely for insubordination. Bragg explains the military situation. Rosecrans is around Murfreesboro, his position stretching roughly 40 miles, while Confederate cavalry encloses him in a semicircle over 100 miles of country. That image matters. Bragg is not blind. He knows the geometry. He understands the frontage. He is trying to hold a long line against an enemy with more reliable means of movement and supply. But knowing the problem is not the same as possessing the machine to solve it. Polk gives Fremantle the more emotional version of the Confederate argument. Looking at the people around him, he asks, "How can you subdue such a nation as this?" It is a revealing line because it is both powerful and dangerous. The Confederacy still believes that spirit can compensate for structure. Polk sees will, sacrifice, social cohesion, and a people hardened by invasion. Fremantle sees it too. But will does not repair railroads. Will does not standardize command. Will does not make cavalry screens shorter, artillery more numerous, or industrial output earlier. A nation can be very hard to subdue and still be easier to exhaust than it thinks. Fremantle's days around the army are full of ceremony. He sees church services. He sees reviews. He sees battle flags marked by use. He sees soldiers in good health, but without much uniformity. He sees officers proud of their men and men proud of their generals. He also sees the army's discipline up close. On June the 1st, a soldier is shot at Wartrace. His crime is desertion to the enemy. The execution is not an abstraction. It is the cost of authority in public view. The next day, Fremantle records a line from Grenfell that cuts straight to the center of the episode. Every atom of authority has to be purchased by a drop of your blood. That is not the language of a mature machine. It is the language of a system still forcing obedience into being, one punishment at a time. Authority in this army is not invisible. It has to announce itself. It has to punish. It has to persuade. And when institutions are thin, blood does work that bureaucracy cannot. The strongest action sequence comes at Guy's Gap. Fremantle rides out with cavalry near the front and sees how Confederate screening actually works. Vedettes stand hundreds of yards apart. The chain extends for miles. The country is broken, wooded, and difficult. Cavalry do not merely charge. They dismount, send men forward as skirmishers, hold horses in the rear, and use ground, trees, scouts, and small detachments to make a thin line feel thicker than it is. It is competent. It is adapted to the terrain. It is not foolish, but the scale is brutal. Fremantle hears that the chain of vedettes extends more than 80 miles. That is an immense amount of front for a society trying to fight with limited rails, limited arms, weak central institutions, and armies that depend heavily on local initiative. The Confederate cavalry screen can impress a witness. It can delay. It can scout. It can irritate. It can even win small encounters. It cannot by itself become an industrial command system. Then comes one of Fremantle's strangest observations. Grenfell, a foreign soldier of fortune, is arrested under civil authority. Fremantle treats this as proof that the military has not fully superseded the civil power in the southern states. That matters because the Confederacy is often imagined as pure war government by 1863. Fremantle shows something messier. Civil law still intrudes. Personal quarrels still matter. Command authority still competes with local authority, political culture, and civilian boundaries. That may be admirable in one sense. It also slows the machine. A revolutionary government fighting for survival still has to ask who has the right to command whom, and under what law, and at what cost. The episode ends at Augusta, and Augusta is the best proof that the Confederacy was not simply primitive. Fremantle visits Raines's powder works and records that 7,000 pounds of powder are being made every day. He sees a cannon foundry turning out Napoleon 12-pounders. He sees real industry, real organization, real technical ability. The problem is timing. This capacity is arriving inside a war already shaped by blockade, river control, rail strain, and Union operational speed. The Confederate machine exists in fragments. A powder works here, a cavalry screen there, a fortified bay, a charismatic commander, a church service, a battlefield drill book, a soldier shot for desertion, a train full of men heading east. The pieces are real. The integration is late. That is why Fremantle's officer episode matters. It is not a story about stupid men. It is not a story about cowardice. It is not even a story about the absence of military talent. Hardee is professional. Cleburne rises by ability. Wheeler's cavalry has reach. Bragg understands his frontage. Polk understands the emotional power of the people around him. The soldiers pray, march, endure, and in many cases fight hard. But the war has become a machine contest, and the Confederacy is still asking personality to do too much of the work. Courage can hold a line for a time. Discipline can shoot a deserter. Cavalry can screen a gap. A bishop general can give meaning to sacrifice. A powder works can produce 7,000 pounds a day. None of that automatically creates a state fast enough to survive Grant on the rivers, Rosecrans in Tennessee, the blockade at the ports, and the constant pressure of a larger industrial opponent. Fremantle keeps meeting impressive people inside a failing structure. That is the tragedy of this stage of the journey. The Confederacy still has men who can make the cause look serious, brave, and even formidable at close range. What it cannot build fast enough is the machine that would make their courage decisive. Next, Fremantle leaves the generals and enters Charleston, elegant, fortified, defiant, and already standing under the guns. Subscribe for the rest of Fremantle's journey, Neko. Next, Charleston under the guns. The Confederacy's birthplace as a beautiful, fortified trap.